So good morning. My neighbours, I'm director of the Sfmi and principal consultant of Clara Advisory, and today we have our, I believe it's our report launch, which is very well needed to drive forward in change and trying to amend the issues that we call it. What do we have on the agenda for us today? So a bunch of speakers. We have the Mandy Adams, who's our analyst at the Sfmi group, and also Sonia Bonsley, who's director of corporations at CDP. So note for everyone, you will see our report live at 10 a.m. today. So bear with us on that, and we don't want to be giving away during the event today. Okay, just a quick overview of our agenda, and I'm going to hand over. Okay, brilliant. Can I just double check that?
Yeah.
Yes, so I'm just doing a quick from everyone's side. If you're going to just get a couple of messages in the chat function. Okay, sorry. So I hear the connection's a little poor, I think. Thank you very much, Petra, for that. I'm going to carry on, but I will be handing over to Sunil pretty quickly, and then
Okay. So I think Chris is. Chris, are you still there?
I am, but I'm going to hand over to you so I can come off and come back on. So if you start your.
Yeah, Sophie, do you want to load up the slides from your side, share them? And then I can pick up. Okay. So I found out that Chris's Wi-Fi only goes and only has problems when he's presenting. Yeah. Okay. Sophie, you got the slides to pull up?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to share them.
That's it.
I'm sharing mine, Sophie, so don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, do you want to scroll through? Yeah. Okay, yep, carry on. Okay, so for the Sfmi for this year, we've had 9 organisations involved, and we've also had a number of additional signatories that have supported us and additional organisations as well. I think we've taken a slight addition role this year as well, so a number of additional activities that we've held, which will come on to, and it's helped to inform us about the forward developments of the Sfmi and how that's going to progress as well. Next slide, yeah. So in terms of the year that we've had, there's been a number of publications that have come through. We've got a series of annual programs and reports that are updated. So the 23 criteria reports and also the summary reports are produced each year. We've also updated the Sustainable Procurement Report, which will be launched in January 22. And then also are looking at the Scope 3 report, which is a research piece of work that we're providing as well. One of the other pieces of work that we're going to be presenting in January, February next year is the KPI report. So it's the forward roadmap for the FM sector and sustainability moving forward. So that's a conversation that the partners had back a month ago or so, finalising that, and then we're looking to get that released in early parts of next year. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so as a quick overview of 2021, and just looking at the perspective from not just the FM perspective, but also some of the drivers that are coming in as well. So 2021 has seen a lot of changes, but it comes off the back of 2020, where COVID, the pandemic, led to fundamental shift in behaviours. One of the first areas that have been discussed is the return to workplace, which is a discussion which organisations have dealt with in different ways. And there's certainly been a huge amount of discussion and conjecture in the marketplace around the rights and wrongs of it and how to proceed. What all of that has led to is a different role for FM in terms of the provision of data and information, in the provision of being able to respond to organisations' requirements, but also to actively get engaged in the decision-making process. So that's led to reinforcing the role and the link that FM has with the senior management role and the alignment in terms of the forward direction for the business. And that comes not only in the decision-making, but also how to continue with the decision. So the engagement, the encouragement of individuals to come back into the office, right the way through to other issues of needing to have 2 screens, one at home and one in the office, and how those items are then managed and delivered. One of the other big changes that's come through is the role of finance and investors in the community in general. And we've started to get a greater focus on ESG criteria and ESG measurements. We've started to see more in the way of sustainable management becoming a key item as well, in the way that finance, that investors are starting to view corporate behaviour and corporate action. So a plethora of different standards out there that are existing which are coming together. But one of the things that Glasgow brought us was to reinforce the role of finance that we're seeing, and to use finance as being a driver for change as well within organisations. So what that's leading to is certainly a more coordinated approach, but it's also a more detailed response, which is a trend that we'll see certainly into 2022 as well, is around having much greater depth to the information which is being provided. That depth will not only be for the organisation, but it is going to reach out into the wider value chain as well. 2021 also saw the release in summer of the Ipcc reports. So that set a stark warning. It preceded COP26, and it did make the statement that the planet is currently at a warming of around 1.1 degrees. Climate change impacts are here and present, and that they will continue to increase in their impacts. So whilst those impacts will increase, what we can do is to be able to mitigate the worst effects that will appear into the future. So there is a direct request and a drive for change to take place quickly. The way that that's been responded to has, again, been variable. There's a number of organisations out there who have acted very strongly, have started to take leadership roles, have started to drive through carbon programs across the whole business, including supply chain, and change their organisational behaviours and culture as well to respond to that. The flip side of that, and unfortunately, the FM sector is no different to any other sector, there's also been a number of organisations which have used it as a PR opportunity and starting to propose actions which on the surface appear good, but don't go into any level of depth or response to that. And that's in part where the Scope 3 reports that we're producing comes in as well, because what we want to look at is that wider view that says 80% of FM's impact is in their supply chain. So if we're only looking at the direct activities, that's only going to be a small proportion of the total impacts that an organisation has. So without reviewing that supply chain, we're not really going to make some significant changes. And the final area which touches upon all of these is the need for better data. So the better data helps with improved decision making, but there's also been a requirement for increased disclosure. And that disclosure comes both in terms of numeracy, but it also comes in terms of the narrative of forward trends and the journey that organisations are making. And so the drive here is about having a meaningful forward path. It's not about needing to do things straight away or needing to respond in the immediacy, but it's about having a forward path which has meaning, but is also achievable and drives change within the organisation. And again, different organisations are on different journeys in their achievements of that pathway. So what's going to be required, both learnings from this year and as we move into next year? So firstly, forward targets, forward measures, forward narrative and forward data is going to be needed to satisfy both business requirements and investors. So we're talking about short-term gateposts and longer-term targets. The Race to Zero sets 2030 and 2050 targets. The government's criteria, PPN 0621, which is the criteria which the government uses around net zero, includes 5 or 6 parts of Scope 3 emissions, is also looking at mandating a 2050 timeline attached to that as well. We're also looking at communication and transparency improving, and that's going to be not only with employees, but it's also about wider engagement through the value chain as well. So how do we get that two-way conversation with suppliers, not only in terms of being able to share our challenges and looking for them for support, but also how do we identify innovation and how do we drive that innovation through to make those changes? So the challenge for FM is how do we articulate this? As a sector, we're very good at navel gazing, at looking inwards. We've become adept in the last 18 months at being able to have conversations with senior management as a peer-to-peer level. So the challenge for next year is about how do we articulate this to the business whilst the door is still open, and we've got an ability to be able to align with the business objectives, but also to be able to influence them as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
So I'm going to give it another go to see if I'm heard correctly. If I'm not, pop me a message. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, yeah.
Cool, brilliant. All right, thank you very much, Noel. Thanks for taking over in my seconds of need. Okay, so next up then, we're bringing in a new speaker into the CDP fold. Sonia Bonsley from, into the SFMI fold, should I say, bringing Sonia Bonsley from CDP. Now, Sonia's been working at CDP for a long time, and she heads up the value chains and the director of corporations for the organisation. So we're going to be getting her insight into the kind of the macro level of how businesses are driving their suppliers to make changes. So Sonia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Certainly can.
Wonderful. Well, I'm
Over to you,
delighted to be here with everyone. I'm also very impressed that you're running such an early morning call. Well done, everyone, for making it here. So I was listening quite intently to what Sunil was saying, and it's actually very similar to what I was going to tell you. But hopefully I can give you a few extra points just to illustrate what we're seeing at CDP from the global trends, but also from some of the biggest corporations around the world. As Chris mentioned, my name's Sonia Bonsai. I'm Global Head of Value Chains at CDP, and I'm Regional Director of Corporations. That essentially means that I lead all the corporate-facing work in the UK, Middle East, and Africa. But it's a really terrible acronym, so we went with Regional Director instead. We can move on to the first slide. Thank you. This is actually more of an introduction to CDP. Now, if I'd been in a room, I have to admit, it's one of the things I do miss post-COVID, I'd have asked who here's heard of CDP. I'm going to presume that most people have, but I'm just going to give you a quick 3-minute introduction in case you haven't heard of us. CDP is a global not-for-profit organisation that's been around for about 2 decades. We were founded on the principles that what is measured is managed. And when climate change was first starting to come into the public view, a lot of different people were talking to businesses through consumer campaigns, they were talking to governments. But one of the areas we noticed that there wasn't a lot of engagement going on was around investors. And so our founders spoke to a handful of investors and said, climate change is coming, it's going to affect business, you need to be part of the solution. What actions are you taking and what do you need to do going forward? And the investors were very pragmatic. They said, what we need is data and information on businesses, who's doing what, who's doing well, who's falling slightly behind the curve. And the way that they get data, they wanted it completely replicated to the way they get their financial information, because that's how they run things. They get information and they put it into models. And so we run an annual environmental disclosure system. We started with climate change. We now cover water security and deforestation as well. That was a quite strong theme of COP. Sunil touched on COP leading to new and interesting trends that are coming through, but the role of interconnectedness with nature actually came through stronger this COP than any COP I've ever seen previously. So we collect this information from companies on behalf. We were collecting this information from companies on behalf of investors. And we started off with a handful or so. We now work with in excess of 600 investors who represent, last time I presented, it was next to Bloomberg, because they said around the world, 1/3 of the world's global wealth. And they request thousands of companies to disclose to CDP on an annual basis. And they don't just ask about the emissions figures, and Sunil touched upon this. They are asking a lot more about these companies. They want to know what the emissions are, what their targets are they aligned with science for the future, what risks they're seeing, what opportunities, and what measures they're taking to meet these targets and reduce these risks. And so that goes into an annual form of reporting. Now, as companies were going through and reporting to investors, and those numbers went up and up year on year, what we also saw is the companies that were reporting, very similar to what Sunil said, started to articulate, actually, there was a lot more risk and opportunity outside their operational control. There was a lot more impact outside of their operational control. And some recent research I did last year said on average globally, across all sectors, supply chain emissions are 11.4 times that of their operational emissions. Now that gets more and more the closer you get to the top of the supply chain, with the likes of retailers being in excess of 27 times that of their operational emissions. And so these companies have started to recognize that supply chain risk, and then they too ask their suppliers to disclose to CDP, sort of building out that picture. You go on to the next slide. I promised Chris I'd stay on time. So all in all, what we've seen is an increase in the amount of disclosure and transparency, and it's gaining pace is the thing I would really highlight. Last year it was 9,000 companies. This year we're in excess of 13,000, and those numbers are growing up year on year. What we're also seeing is it's not just the biggest companies in the world. We had over 1,000 SMEs disclosed to us last year. We are seeing sharp rate increases in disclosure in Southeast Asia, India, China, Latin America. It's very much becoming a global transition, as opposed to previously being led usually by Europe and America. If you move on to the next slide. Now, coming out of COP, one of the things that really highlighted to us, particularly if anyone was up there and in the blue zone, was the rate of pace. Now, CDP was amongst a group of not-for-profits that founded something called Science-Based Targets. And we launched it with the WWF, WRI, WBCSD. We launched it around Paris, so 5 years, oh no, 6, I keep forgetting because of COVID, we missed a COP. We launched it around 6 years ago, and we launched with 23 companies who committed and signed off targets that were aligned to exactly what we were saying before, Austin was saying before, the UNFCCC's ambitions for keeping us at a 1.5 world. And well, it was a 2-degree world back then. And those companies, I think nobody would be surprised to guess, were very much the big global companies, the big brands. Walmart, I believe, was up there. Dell was up there. BT from the UK was up there. I remember being there and presenting alongside them. And so they were the ICT sectors, they were the consumer goods sectors and the retailers. Things have changed over the last 6 years. Just to run you through the numbers, over 2,000 companies have formally committed to setting SBTs. Over 1,000 of them have them. And of those 2,000, 1,040 aligned to this business ambition for 1.5. That's a massive change in pace. And I recently ran a panel with the CSOs of cement manufacturer and the CSO of an energy company, NRG, if you know them. They're from the high emitting sector, but even they have highlighted that despite them being from what we call the high impact center or emissions intensive sectors, that the supply chain aspect is coming through strongly for them in their transition to a 1.5 world. So what this means is that, especially from your perspective, that the biggest customers are setting these targets that cover their supply chain. And more what we're seeing is that they're actually going to be cascading this action down the supply chain and this level of ambition. Move on to the next slide. I'll keep going because I don't want to go too over time. Go on to the next slide. So what is one interesting thing that you could take back to your bosses if you want to say about the rate of transition? As Sunil highlighted, ESG has joined the pace in a new way. They've been previously working with CDP and the focus had been on disclosure. But what we've seen over the last 3 years is them looking at setting their own science-based targets and realizing that to set their own science-based targets, they need their portfolios aligned to do so. And they actually have created a group, these investors, that are committed to asking some of the biggest companies in the world to set their own science-based targets and cascade it down their value chain. If you move on to the next slide. That looks like 220 financial institutions signed up to do that this year, which is a 60% growth. 26 of these supply chain members, these purchasing organizations, most of whom who have their own 1.5 degrees have also signed up to that. And they're sending combined requests to 1,600 companies representing about $40 trillion of market cap, and they cover about 25% of global emissions. So this alignment between the investors and the supply chain or the customers is only growing. We're seeing it more and more year on year. They're aligned in the pace, they're aligned in the ambition levels, and they're aligned in their engagement to companies that's going to be cascading down the line. And I also ran some interesting panels, of which NatWest was one of them. Mark Carney's GFANS, which was sort of highlighted before, 450 institutions, 130 trillion of assets or money. What these institutions were saying is that they are going to be reallocating this money in line with this 1.5 future. We also saw quite a lot of banks start to insinuate that this is also going to be tied to their loan books, which is really exciting, actually. So if anybody that's looking to raise capital will have to be thinking in the line of a 1.5 future as well. And Chris wanted me to stop around now, so I will go on to the next slide, and then I'll cut off myself off there. And just to give you some examples of those companies, of some of the purchasers that are overtly stating they're going to be cascading 1.5 down their supply chain. There are 3 quotes here from CPOs, and actually that's Microsoft on the right hand side. That's Lucas Jopper, he's their CSO. You can see, and I won't read these aloud because I presume you get the deck at the end, the exact quotes as to we will be cascading this level of ambition, these level of SBTs down our supply chain. So what we're going to be seeing is the need and tracking them. They're talking about tracking them through CDP, but tracking that these targets are being taken up, but also that they are on route to meet these targets, because these companies can't meet their scope 3 targets without the support of their supply chain. So that's the message that we're seeing. It's very exciting from us, and from coming out of COP, just to really underline what Sunil highlighted, the investors and the purchasers are very much aligned. They're looking to align ambition on a 1.5 world, and then they are looking to track meeting this ambition, which will involve cascading that ambition down the supply chain. Okay, I'm going to stop there because Chris was quite very specific. A little bit of time. Oh, if anyone's wondering from the types of companies, if you see any of your customers in here, it's likely that they will be asking you to align to a 1.5 in the future. These are the ones that we work with directly. All right, thanks very much for having me. Any questions, I'll be happy to take them, but I think there's a panel at the end. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Sonia. That was great. And yeah, I think the FM industry is such a customer-focused market, and it's not a high impact market, which I think is why we see there's a big variety in organisations and their abilities to understand carbon emissions. We've got leaders in the industry, but then also there's a lot of organisations out there who just don't have the understanding and the knowledge within the business. And so I think this is great to iterate that point, from the private sector's perspective, that there's a real drive for all businesses to be learning and understanding this, and that's not even including the public sector, which is obviously a very big purchaser of FM services, and obviously they have their requirements as well, which we've gone into in numerous reports in the past and in current reports. So now we're going to discuss the findings from the SFMI approach, from the SFMI audits and assessments this year. So I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who's going to give us an introduction for those of you who aren't aware of the approach that the SFMI takes, and also and then we're going to kind of tag team our way through the slide deck from now. So Sophie, over to you.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so Maddie, if you're able to go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So I'll just kind of do a very brief overview of the SFMI. I feel like most people will be pretty familiar with the process that we kind of go through, but I'll just kind of highlight that before we get kicked off with the findings. So kind of for those of you who don't know, the SFMI assesses the largest FM providers within the UK on their ability to kind of govern and manage sustainability internally across our 23 ESG criteria, which you can see here. We also assess how they are able to implement sustainability into their client services as well as their own operations. And obviously this is very kind of fragile balance. There's many factors involved and kind of at play here. So the company culture and how the internal staff are nurtured, and also kind of including training, and how contracts are able to assess their potential for sustainability as well is kind of a load of the things that we look at within the organisations and the assessments that we carry out. So we assess businesses through a combination of their public data and also engagement with directly with the businesses themselves through audits. And we have a kind of a three-stage approach to how we carry out our assessments. So the initial assessment is a desktop public data assessment. Then the organisations will receive an initial assessment report, which highlights the findings that we've found and also identifies kind of key areas for discussion that we would like to have within the audits. Then the second stage is the audit itself, and they will receive a post-audit, which is a one-day audit for each company, and they will receive a post-audit note, which again highlights any kind of additional discussions and findings that we've gone through within the audit, and any kind of final questions that we'd like to kind of clear up with them before the final scores provided. So then each company will be provided with a couple of weeks to send over any further additional evidence or kind of any evidence that they've discussed in the audit but weren't able to show on the day, and then we'll give them their final score at the end. So that's the kind of three stages that we go through each year for the audits. And next slide, please. So this is a graph just showing the kind of the spread of the industry scores from this year. As you can see, kind of it cascades down from quite high scores at the top left, down to some pretty low scores at the bottom right. This section at the top that we've highlighted from the leaders, these are mostly our FM providers and partners, and those kind of sitting below that 68% score, which is our kind of recommended score that we'd like to see organisations kind of trying to achieve, which is the gold level for the SFMI. Those other organisations are ones which we've carried out desktop assessments on, but those largely aren't part of the SFMI. So you can really see the kind of benefit here of engaging in the SFMI, and engaging with the framework is kind of a proxy for wanting to engage within sustainability. So it makes sense that those organisations that are engaging are generally scoring higher. They're really kind of driving that culture to embed sustainability within the organisation. They're committing to long-term sustainability targets and actions and strategies. But this wide range that we're seeing kind of within this graph here does make it difficult for FM procurers to understand the capabilities of FMs and to decide who they want to go with. So that's really why we want to be kind of driving open disclosure throughout the SFMI to make it clearer for procurers to understand what their FMs are able to do for them. We've also been pushing up the criteria within the SFMI framework this year, and we continue to do so year on year. So this essentially makes it more difficult for organisations to be achieving those really high scores. So therefore, organisations need to be continuing to step up year on year in order to be able to achieve the highest scores possible. Next slide, please. So this slide is just kind of showing that spread of data in a slightly different way. So we're able to split our 23 criteria into those which are primarily concerned with the kind of corporate strategic management of sustainability, and then also those which are concerned more so with the implementation of sustainability. And ideally, we'd like to see organisations kind of sitting somewhere along that kind of dotted line, that diagonal dotted line that you can see, so to provide kind of balance. And that there's not too much variation kind of between one side and the other. Some of you might recognize this this kind of style of graph from last year. So we've got the kind of the white section. So we've got these three groups basically that the FM providers sit in. So that white section is covering those organizations which only really show a kind of tokenistic understanding of sustainability, which leads to the impression that they're just playing lip service for marketing benefits, and they're not really integrating it solidly kind of throughout their organization. Then you've got that middle kind of light grey section. These are the organizations that are able to manage sustainability at a very basic level, and are able to contribute to the challenges kind of alongside good FM service, but they're not providing clear evidence of the kind of fundamental frameworks and targets and processes to really embed sustainability solidly within the organization. And then finally, you kind of move up to that top right corner with the dark grey square. And this is where, again, most of our leaders are sitting. And these are the organizations that are able to integrate sustainability fully within their own organization, but also starting to integrate it into their client sustainability strategies, and just kind of the general management of issues kind of across the ESG spectrum. Again, like I mentioned before, the SFMI index score of 68%. This is kind of a target gateway which shows how businesses have the capability to integrate sustainability, integrate with the sustainability strategy of their clients. It shows that they're positioning themselves as a sustainable FM provider, and that they've got expertise in the business across the sustainability spectrum. Again, this year we've identified 6 leaders, all of which are the SFMI partners, and we've also witnessed a kind of a larger move from the rest of the organizations that we've assessed, kind of moving up from that white section and more kind of tiptoeing into that kind of middle grey section since last year, which is great to see that kind of outside of the SFMI, the sector is slowly improving as well. Next slide, please.
I think I'd take over here.
Yeah, this one.
Brilliant. So I think, traditionally, I think the audience has been kind of used to seeing that management versus implementation. But what I think we've picked up on through the leaders forums that we've been that have been taking place this year is that I think there's a need to define the minimum standards for organizations to be kind of getting on board with the SFMI approach, and kind of understand what those minimum standards are of those organizations, to then kind of fill that gap between them and the kind of the leaders. And then obviously there's the need for the leaders themselves to kind of be pushed further and further and further, because as Sophie says, we're starting to see a bit of we're starting to see the organizations kind of starting to group together much more at the top, because they've been taking part for a number of years now. I think really an evolution into how we're looking at this is how we're looking at organizations is starting to think about how environmental, social and governance issues cut across the strategic level. So kind of the frameworks at the top, the understanding of risks from the top level, and the board commitments and such like that, and then how it's integrated into the operational level, both from the in-house perspective, but then also for their the service lines. So how are environmental, social and governance issues embedded within the services that are provided? And then also an area which we've been approaching, but I think we're going to be taking more of an understanding of going into the future is then, what are those minimum requirements for the supply chain as well in that environmental, social and governance. And so being able to define, what are the minimum standards and what are the and what's the best practice within those 3 different levels. Now this is all based on the drivers that we're seeing from the customers' understandings, but then also allowing organizations to achieve what what the employee drivers are as well, so they can position themselves for kind of the talent pool, which is becoming harder and harder to pick and choose the right talent for the organisation. Many sectors are seeing that real competition out there to get the best talent, and this is one particular way that younger talent are selecting businesses to work for. And then also there's that better need to understand the risk, which is why, again, understanding that minimum standards of the supply chain management is quite important. So really what we're looking to do then is really to use our learnings from the past, our discussions with organizations, and understand what kind of guidance is required going into the future. So I just wanted to give those three levels really, because this is how we're starting to structure the analysis of our of the information in a second. So next slide, please. So from the strategic level, what we're going to kind of probe into some kind of key areas that have come out. So from a finance risk management perspective, and then also disclosure and values as well, which I think is very poignant given Sonia's involvement in the event. So this graph here shows the average scores from leaders and non-leaders. By the way, this information is all in the report as well, so I will kind of skim through it. But I'm just going to pick out a few key areas if you pop onto the next slide. So from a finance perspective, I think one of the key gaps that we've picked up on during this year is while the understanding of the TCFD is there amongst companies that have sustainability teams, I think there's a lack of understanding of transferring that knowledge over into that finance part of the organization. So as Sophie mentioned, when we're assessing companies, we're not just interviewing people from the sustainability team, we're cutting across all parts of the organization, from the strategic level through to the supply chain, and then across that organization level, because we're really trying to find how embedded sustainability is across these parts of the organization. And we're finding that the finance parts of the organization, they know about the TCFD, but they don't quite have that full understanding in how it will impact them going into the future, and how it can be used for decision making. From a risk management perspective, we're seeing from that leadership perspective that the leaders of the organization are now understanding, and it comes through within the interviews, that they understand the enterprise risk level. What I think we are seeing less of, though, is then how that understanding of sustainability related risks, whether it be climate change or social issues, how they then start to work their way down through the organization risk levels, and then into the contract level understanding. So how is climate change affecting things on a contract level? This goes down into things like the comfort of buildings and the building's ability to be able to adapt to warmer climate and temperatures, and what's the function of the FM teams in terms of managing that risk. From business models, we're starting to see kind of different approaches to how sustainability is starting to be integrated into the services provided. This kind of comes in a couple of different ways. We have businesses which have kind of forming their own kind of consultancy style services around kind of climate change, net zero, and sustainability. And then they're really going in as a specialist of sustainability, but then starting to kind of feed in the FM service lines behind that kind of that kind of first knowledge, first specialism of understanding. So then the strategies are being written, and then the FM teams are then coming in as part of that approach in order to manage the impacts. Likewise, there are other organizations where they're starting to understand the strategies of the companies themselves, and they're providing the services which are then solutions which will help a business form those strategies. So a couple of different models are starting to be taken in that integration. And then from a disclosure perspective, which is quite important, is that we see it being still light from a public disclosure perspective, again, which is why we asked Sonia to come on, just to give a bit of bit more emphasis to this point. I think the FM industry has been is playing a bit of catch up when it comes to disclosure. It's not a heavy emitting industry at all. However, and so it hasn't been caught into this kind of voluntary reporting net, which a lot of the heavier industries have history working within. But unfortunately, that's working to its disadvantage at the moment, because the industry should be positioning itself as a solution to its customers' kind of targets and its customers' sustainability goals and requirements. And that requires more disclosure, because you're needing to put yourself above the competitors in the field and place your organization as a, we know what we're doing. Look at our transparency. It's not about just releasing a net zero target without any information about it. Net zero targets require a lot of disclosure in order to help organizations understand whether it's a greenwashing target or actually whether it really does make sense, and it's well thought of, and it's completely backed by data and science, and that requires a lot of disclosure. And we're seeing the FM industry being very light on that disclosure. So next slide, please. I'm going to very quickly touch on the supply chain side. So here again, we have the trends of the supply chain scores from across the remit of the industry, both leaders and non-leaders. We specifically focus in on the supply chain teams themselves and the procurement teams during our interviews. So next slide. So I think what we're seeing is that the supply chain teams are becoming knowledgeable for sure in sustainability, and we're having some great interviews with how the organizations are understanding the theories of sustainability and how it relates to the organization. I think there's a lack of understanding of where should a supply chain be in terms of the minimum requirements for onboarding and how they relate to potential risks within the supply chain, which is again why I mentioned at the beginning about that need for the SFMI to be looking at those minimum standards and minimum understanding. And then quickly, because I know we're short on time a little bit, there's just a quick point about circular economy. So we again, so we're seeing kind of local. So circular economy is something which I think is very which can be integrated very kind of well within the supply chain, and solutions can come from that. And I think it's a good example of how solutions can be drawn out of the supply chain in order to then serve the customer needs. And I think we're struggling again to see more modern examples of how businesses, how FM companies are working collaboratively with the suppliers in order to say, okay, here's our problem, here's what we need for our customers. Let's work together and let's take forward, let's develop ideas together and let's take those forward to the customers. We are seeing solutions which are off the shelf, which have been provided to the customers. However, I think there's a need for kind of pushing innovation within the supply chain. I think still the best example that we have of this kind of innovation in the supply chain still comes from BAM, which is 2 or 3 years old now, and how they worked with a supplier in order to say, okay, we need a particular product which is going to require the circular economy embedded into it. So let's work together for a period of time and take that solution to the customer. And I think we need to see more of that innovation in the supply chain. So Sophie, over to you now to take us home.
Thank you. So if you could just go on to the next slide, thank you. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go over the operational findings and then the kind of lowest scoring criteria, some key statistics, and then we'll kind of move on to the next section. So again, similar to the other slides, you can see here the kind of leaders and non-leaders scores for some of the kind of hot operational topics that we've identified through this year. So we've pulled out employment and social mobility, zero carbon, Obviously, this spans across a wide variety of our 23 criteria. Then we've got transport, biodiversity and ecology, and social value, which again does cover off several different of our criteria. So if you go to the next slide. So starting off with employment and social mobility, we did see general kind of improvements here across the industry, particularly when looking at apprenticeships and Kickstarter schemes. There was a lot of organisations which are kind of increasing the amount of these that they're running, and also the kind of data that they're collecting around these as well. But in order to be scoring the top scores within the employment section of the SFMI framework, we really need organisations to be kind of providing more evidence around the kind of social improvements and social mobility that they're creating and providing through their employment. And this is an area where we kind of were seeing a slight lack in evidence. So and also kind of a lack of understanding around the concept itself, especially around social mobility. So this is really something that I think we'd like to see kind of being driven forwards in the future. And also another side of it was setting FM specific targets, and also having kind of set budgets as well for certain kind of social value and kind of employment initiatives. So you know, a lot of organisations are setting targets as well at the kind of group level, but we'd also like to be seeing these being transitioned down to FM specific targets as well. On the zero carbon side of things, this has been kind of an increasing awareness kind of year on year, and this year especially we saw increased awareness around net zero and science-based targets, which aligned really nicely with COP as well. The Science-Based Targets Initiative has defined a net zero as reducing scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions to zero, or to a residual level that's consistent with reaching net zero emissions at the global or sector level in eligible 1.5 degree aligned pathways. So from this we can kind of determine that the terminology that's being used for companies achieving net zero emissions, this is kind of more in line with setting long-term goals and targets, rather than those more short-term targets that we see being aligned more so with carbon offsetting. So most of the kind of larger FM organisations are not really setting kind of engaging with carbon offsets too greatly. They are trying to reduce their emissions first before relying on offsets to achieve their net zero goals. Then on the transport side of things, again, this was one of the largest kind of the most significant focuses that we saw within the industry this year, largely being driven by net zero and also legislation changes. So the UK government has pledged to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. So this was going to be a significant driver for the changes that we've seen within transport this year. However, we do see that there's a high cost for kind of quick electrification of fleets. So this is an area where we've seen some of the smaller organisations and smaller FMs starting to struggle here, because the cost is just too high at this point to make any kind of quick, rapid changes. And a lot of organisations are trapped into you know, 3, 4, 5 year lease deals with certain vehicles, so kind of exiting out of those deals would be just too expensive. And there's a continued presence kind of larger commercial vehicles with ICE engines, which, you know, there's some way to go with the electrification of these larger vehicles as well. With biodiversity, we've seen this has been a low scoring criteria kind of year on year, just down to the kind of low perceived priority within the industry, and a lot of organisations don't necessarily understand the impact that they can have with biodiversity and ecology initiatives. However, these initiatives have increased across the sector this year that we've noted, and this is largely coming from a growing interest from customers, as well as you know, when FMs are engaging in biodiversity initiatives. This is very demonstrable results that they can get from these. They can create case studies to demonstrate to their customers and their stakeholders the things that they're engaging with and the impacts that they're having on their local environment. The link between biodiversity and well-being is really quite well understood across the industry, but we're now trying to incorporate a link with net zero as well. But this is quite difficult to quantify biodiversity within net zero targets. This is an area that we've kind of seen lacking within the industry. And then finally, with social value, this is still largely being driven by client demand and stakeholder reputation. Again, we're still, as in previous years, we're still seeing this often being kind of provided and measured within contracts which stipulate it within the bid. So there's kind of a lack of organisations incorporating it into all contracts as standard. And this progress is being hindered by the ability to kind of accurately measure social value success that's being provided within contracts. So next slide, please. I'll just quickly go through these low scoring criteria. So many of these we've already mentioned before, so I won't go into too much detail about these. So again, ecology and biodiversity, we've seen some improvement this year. Although this graph that I'm showing now is the leaders and non-leaders. This incorporates non-SFMI partners as well. So that's reflective in the scoring. And this is just generally low kind of across the sector. Water is another low scoring criteria year on year, but this is something that we really want to be driving moving forward in coming years as FMs start to understand the impact that they can have on reducing water consumption, both within their own organisation, but also how they're able to influence their contracts and their clients. And Methven will be leading our next bite-sized webinar in January on water, so make sure that you keep your eyes peeled and sign up for that to hear what they've got to say on water. Like Chris mentioned earlier, so I won't go into too much detail for these. Finance and disclosure, again, these are pretty generally quite low scoring criteria. Disclosure especially has been kind of decreasing in the last couple of years as we've been increasing the requirements to be achieving the top scores within the SFMI framework. So this is something that we really want to be putting out a call to action for the sector, for overall improvement for both the SFMI partners and also the non-partners as well. In the collaboration side of things, we often see that there's kind of lots of informal collaborations that organisations have with their with various different organisations, but we'd like to see them kind of formalising the approach that they have to collaborations, which includes kind of introducing collaboration policies and strategies, as well as measuring the value outputs that they gain from these collaborations. And we'd also like to see our FM organisations engaging more with their customers as well on their own sustainability journeys. And finally, as Chris mentioned earlier, with the circular economy, awareness across the industry is there, but we'd really like to be driving kind of the behaviour change around waste management and how this kind of can benefit FMs, as well as kind of utilising the procurement teams to be driving a circular approach throughout the organisation. Next slide, please. Finally, these are just a few key statistics that we've kind of pulled out from this year. So around the supply chain and kind of engaging with suppliers to achieve sustainability goals and implementing KPIs as well. We've only had one FM provider doing this year, so this is an area that we'd really like to be seeing kind of improving over the next few years. Employment and sustainable communities both increased by 3% this year, and this was largely being driven by the apprenticeship schemes and the Kickstarter schemes as well. And just the increased understanding around the measurement of social value through employment and also in contracts. Most organisations are understanding the link between ecology and wellbeing, but like I mentioned earlier, the formalised link with the net zero strategy is something that we'd like to be driving moving forward around ecology. And currently there's only one company that's tackling this so far. So this is something that we'd like to be seeing kind of spreading throughout the industry. And finally, with full commitment and supply chain management, these also increased by 3% this year. thanks to a kind of an increased understanding for embedding sustainability throughout the management and implementation of FM and also of their supply chain. And I think that's everything from me. So I'll hand that back to Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sophie. Thank you.
Right.
So flip onto the next slide. I think really what this drives really is the there are key topics which the industry is looking to concentrate on. This being around zero carbon and an understanding of Scope 3 emissions within that. I think there's a discrepancy between especially within Scope 3 around what is measured and what can go towards a net zero target, which is why we've undertaken Sunil mentioned it at the beginning of the event, the approach to kind of providing guidance to the industry for measuring Scope 3 emissions. There's an understanding of the need for driving the supply chain itself, but I think there's a lack of understanding into where the supply chain needs to be in terms of standards and how to get them there. So I think there's engagement within the supply chain, and there's kind of general learnings which is being delivered to the supply chain, but actually being able to say, we need to get you to this particular point, and these are the key kind of innovations that we want to be seeing in particular topics of sustainability. There's a lack of that happening. And then finally, there's social value, which I think has generally the industry understands the concept. Well, the concept is becoming clearer and kind of more aligned with UK government requirements. But again, I think there's a discrepancy in how it's implemented, but also in how it's embedded across contracts that the FM providers are putting out there. So there's often, when it's required as a contractual purpose, it's been done and it's taken up and it's given resource, but there are a few companies who are looking to embed it across contracts as standard operating procedures. And so this then highlights the need for greater disclosure and transparency about the approach that the industry takes, and also guidance. And so what we're kind of looking to do then is provide that guidance, and to say, here are the minimum standards that we're expecting of the industry if you're looking to become a sustainable FM provider and you're looking to engage customers on this journey. So after me telling Sonia to stick to time, I think me and Sophie have done nicely to go over time there. So what we'll do is we'll shift on now to our next speaker, Alan Wickham, who many of you have heard from before. So I need not introduce Alan to the fray, but Alan and NatWest became a signatory to the SFMI, I think at the beginning of this year, and is really helping us to drive the understanding of the needs of sustainability in the FM industry as from that customer perspective. So Alan, could I bring you in?
Yeah, morning Chris, morning everyone. So many of you will be from FM organisations that are listening this morning. So as Chris said, we thought it would be useful just to give a client organisation view of why we've become a signatory, and also some of the work that we've done this year with the SFMI. So NatWest supports 19 million people, families, businesses throughout the UK, and our purpose is to champion potential. So we want to break down barriers and build financial confidence so that those communities and people can thrive. One of the three central pillars to our purpose is our climate ambition. And our ambition is to be a leading bank in the UK and Republic of Ireland, helping to address the climate challenge. Sonia's already mentioned the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, earlier on in the call. But as part of that wider group, we've joined the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So that means that we want to be net zero for our full value chain by 2050. And that includes our customers, and implicit in that is also our supply chain. In terms of achieving a credible pathway, we've then set the ambition to halve the impact of our financing by 2030. And then, because we wanted to lead by example, we moved our own operations to net zero in 2020. And we're currently working towards capturing more carbon than we emit from our own operations, so that by 2025 we can be climate positive. All of this is great for the climate, and it's very purposeful, but what sits behind this is a big risk. So the risk for me was that whilst me and my team are all focused on climate and carbon, how do we ensure that nothing else is missed? What were the things that could potentially trip us up? And if we're publicly talking about these goals and something goes wrong, then what happens? So as part of mitigating that risk, we signed up to the Sfmi, and that's because of its wider focus on broader ESG. So not just on the climate, but on the other social issues and other risks that we need to manage. Things that are particularly important to us are things like modern slavery, living wage, inclusion, bringing in a broader environmental view, and also being a bank, governance. So as part of signing up to the Sfmi signatories, we commissioned a responsible business audit. This looked more deeply at those issues that really mattered to us as an organisation. So if we move on to a slide, we can see what some of those issues were. It's broadly based on the same Sfmi methodology that you as FM providers will have all been assessed with, but it also looked very specifically at the issues that were associated with NatWest achieving our public goals, and we wanted to do that to make sure that we were on track. So we completed the responsible business audit this year, and as you can see, we kind of found three general kind of hotspots, if you like, these are the three areas of improvement which have informed our 2022 targets. So the first is circular economy. So I was quite interested when Sophie explained earlier that that's kind of one of the lowest scoring criteria kind of across the sector. So that was quite interesting to see. For us, we've got a great focus on our waste, so our output in the process, if you like, but we weren't very focused on the input to some of our processes. So we're building that more into our model and building in more of a circular economy focus. Data, so supplier data and transparency have been mentioned. And for us as well, that's very much a journey that we're going to be going on over the next couple of years. And then finally, business travel. So we've benefited in terms of carbon reductions from business travel because of coronavirus. And as we expect people to return to the office and return to BAU, how do we manage that from a carbon perspective? So we've been able to identify those hotspots and build them into our 2022 plans. And what that's now given us is it's given us some confidence that we're on the right track, that we're not missing any of the big hazards that might come and trip us up on our climate journey. So for us, becoming a Sfmi signatory and undertaking the responsible business audit as part of that has really helped us to ensure that we are mitigating the risks associated with our climate journey. Thanks, Chris, for giving me a chance to speak about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. That's great. Yeah, I think it just shows the adaptability of the model that we've been kind of harnessing over the years with FM providers and kind of that understanding of what's happening in the workplace. So yeah, it's been great working with NatWest on this over the last year. Cool. Okay, so I think there's some awards that we need to give out. So bearing in mind this is e-awards, and so we obviously can't physically give someone an award, but they will be winging their way in the post over the next couple of weeks. So if we pop on to the next slide, we always have a Rising Star award in the, with the SFMI. And this is a particular company who has been, they've been part of the SFMI for a little while now. And what we saw was a bit of a step change last year. I think especially around their kind of, their systems and their approach to kind of how they approach customers with their sustainability plans in order to understand, there's a real drive within the organization to start to understand what the customers want from sustainability. And they made a step improvement from last year. Didn't quite achieve that platinum level, but I believe they were very, very close. So the Rising Star for this year does go to BAM FM for their kind of step up and improvement over the last year, especially when it comes to the COVID year that they've been battling. But we've seen a real kind of marked improvement in the resources that they're pushing towards sustainability within the company. So congratulations to those guys. Next slide. We're going to announce the platinum winners first. These are in alphabetical order, and then the next slide we will be kind of announcing the overall winner. So if you want to hit the button, Maddie, this year's platinum members are announced on the screen. So I think a special congratulations, I think, to Mighty, who have kind of pushed their way up from that gold level into that platinum level this year. Kind of especially again, so seeing that kind of year-on-year improvement within the company, you can see that they are driving sustainability into lots of different business areas, which is great to see. And also, congratulations to Bouygues Energies and Services. We've seen the passion and the understanding of sustainability throughout the organisation. Again, year on year has been growing and growing. And obviously Equans are going through their transition now from NG, but have been kind of vanguards platinum leaders along with Skanska and Vinci facilities for a number of years. So well done to all of those organisations. So finally, we get on to our winner. And I did mention, I think Sophie or I mentioned a little bit earlier, that there's been a bit of a, I guess, a squash up at that top level. Each year we push the certain criteria, the kind of the top level scores. We push the goalposts out a little bit further, and so there's been a number of criteria where we pushed those goalposts this year, which I think has led to this kind of even more squashed kind of a feel at that top. So we do actually have joint winners this year. So if you want to hit the button, Maddie. So our joint winners for this year are Skanska and Vinci Facilities, who did win last year. So congratulations to these two organisations. Skanska, I think they've been there or thereabouts for a number of years, but really worked hard, I think, this year to kind of push their way to that top level. And then Vinci Facilities, we've seen that continued high level for a couple of years now, which is we can really see the embedded sustainability feel from that board level down to the contract level, and how it gets embedded across all kind of all contracts. Measuring and understanding sustainability from a high number of contracts in the business. So congratulations to both organisations. What we're going to do now is because last year we invited Vicky up to the panel, but we don't have time for two speakers, so we're actually going to invite. Because this is Skanska's first year as a platinum winner for a number of years, so we're actually going to invite Sharon Maynard up to the panel, if that's okay with you, Sharon. And then we're going to get into our panel discussion with Sunil chairing it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chris. And thanks very much for all the speakers. I think I've got about 10 minutes for the panel discussion. I think you got some closing words as well, Chris, to say at the end. So I think there's an awful lot that has come out from the assessments this year. So thanks very much, Chris, Sophie, for running through that as well. And again, Alan's words are the adaptability that we can use the assessments for. What I wanted to touch on in my first question was around the supply chain, which is a large part of the conversation today. And in terms of experiences or thoughts around how you've engaged with the supply chain on net zero and sustainability, routes that have worked, and for organisations that are just starting on that journey, what words of recommendation would you or could you give? If I open that up first to Alan.
Yeah, morning. Thanks, Sunil. So yes, we are looking at our supply chain. So I mentioned our overall net zero banking alliance commitment, which includes the full value chain by 2050. I think we're at quite an early stage in our journey. So at the moment, we're very much focused on the transparency side of things with our supply chain. So what we've done is we've modelled our supply chain impact using financial spend as a proxy. We're currently working with our highest impact suppliers. So we've got about 489 suppliers who account for about 80–90% of that spend. So we're working with those specifically to benchmark them with a deeper sort of supplier benchmarking tool. And then from that, we will build organisation specific action plans very much in the spirit of collaboration and incentivization, rather than saying you can't work with us unless you follow a 1.5 degree pathway. So we're taking kind of a transitional, encouraging approach, I think. And then in the background to support all of that, we're kind of making changes to our kind of frameworks and policies. So we've introduced a new Supplier Charter, which covers kind of broader ESG topics, but also climate specifically. And we're also starting to change things such as contractual clauses around gathering data and things like that. So definitely focused on supply chain, but probably still quite early days in kind of that measurement, setting out the boundaries type phase.
Yeah, fantastic. But definitely a helping hand approach there.
Yes.
Sonia and Sharon, for yourselves as well. Yep, Sonia.
I'll happily have to go, because we work with quite a lot of buyers. So, Alan, the story you told is actually, when I saw this question come up, I sort of noted down what because I've done about 7 panels over COP about supply chain, unsurprisingly. And so you've really picked up on the themes of, there's only 3 things I would add that I've seen coming out of the buying sector is the percentage spend. Yours is actually quite high. Typically before COP, we saw 40% of spend being roughly around just under 500 suppliers being the norm. What we're actually seeing is that tick up year on year with the data we collect and with the buyers we're working with to 60 to 80%. So that's actually a new bit that we're seeing come through. Integration, the roadmaps, let go do this as well very well. The roadmaps are really important, but I would really highlight, and the car companies, we work with 8 car companies did this well, that even before they set their SBT, they let the suppliers know that that's the end journey. They're going through the process themselves, but they wanted them to know the direction of travel very early on, so that even if they're only starting to benchmark their emissions for the first time this year, they know that eventually the conversation will turn to the 1.5 or the SBT. And that actually was quite successful for them, because it was a very honest, because you're right about the concerns around greenwashing, where companies are more honest with their suppliers and say, look, we haven't got all the answers, but this is where we're aiming. We want you to align to our values. The suppliers respond really well. And then the integration into procurement practices. I'm seeing some of the older TANs actually getting a little bit tougher. I was at MX this last week, and I had AstraZeneca and Lego on a panel, and this exact question came up. And they said, you know, we've gone through this, we've been doing these roadmaps, but at some point we've got to have these hard conversations, and we've got to have those hard discussions with the suppliers about the future of working with us if they continue to non-comply. And so you're seeing some of these bigger buyers, and that's pharma and a toy manufacturer, both came out and said, look, we haven't got to the point of deselection. We anticipate it will go that way. And what we're doing is building it into our scorecards at the moment, so that if, let's say you've got a competitor that's exactly the same, they score exactly the same on quality, on price, etc., the person that scores higher in environment will win the business. And actually, Dell did that 3 years ago, and it had a really remarkable impact, because it really brought it home that business decisions are being made with environmental data at the heart of them. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sonia. We don't often need an excuse to go to Lego either, so thank you for that. Sharon?
Hi.
If I can bring you in, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so our journey with carbon has included the supply chain from the start. So we were one of the first to include the supply chain in our 2045 zero carbon target. So there's been certain aspects that have been kind of surprising and others that haven't been so surprising. So on the more challenging side, our first estimate, including our supply chain, was done using spend, and so therefore was quite a high level number that we got to. And then we've taken a two-pronged approach. So we've got targets in place for how we will directly interface with our high impact supply chain, and also how we will hone our target. And that's been included now in our business planning for 2024. So some of the challenges that won't be surprising are to do with the data and how we continue to make that more and more accurate. But in terms of what I would say to anybody who's sort of starting out and trying to include their supply chain is just to start somewhere, because it's that first step in saying we've come to a number, and then when you talk to the supply chain and you say this is how we've got to our number, quite often they'll come back and say, well, actually this is a better way of coming to that number, this is how we would like to do it, and this is how we want to work with you on it. And we've had some really good conversations with some of our supply chain about the work that they're doing. And it's leading to quite an interesting conversation around scopes and where things should be counted. Because when we first started, our scope 3 obviously included all of the emissions from the supply chain, but they are now looking at what is their scope 1 and 2 and trying to figure out how to count it and where to put that data. And we need to work together just to ensure that that we're kind of aligned in how we're looking at those numbers, just so that we're all presenting kind of the correct picture. But it's one of those things that you have to start somewhere and then work from that point. And the supply chain are full of great suggestions and innovations, and it's something that we really are going to target more heavily now in the coming years.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Sharon. I think you've touched on an important part, which is this is also still a developing process as well. You know, the science behind the science-based targets and inclusion and data that underpins this all is developing all the time as well. So we also don't know any of the answers either that's moving forwards in terms of, you know, full scope value chain activities. We know where we'd like to get to. But how to get there in a consistent manner is still in progress. The last question, I'm just conscious of time, so I did want to ask just one closing question from everyone, which is key trends that's going to be affecting sector in next year, 22. And if I can ask you to have what your number one or key trend is that's going to be affecting the sector. Alan, if I could start with yourself.
I would say probably economy. I think there's a much more optimistic view of what the economy is going to be sort of post coronavirus and Brexit, but I still do think it's going to be a challenging and competitive environment, and climate is an area of competition in. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Alan. Sonia?
I will say for this sector, particularly in this region, transition plans are going to hit you guys in a big way because of the UK government announcement. The UK government investors and purchasers are all looking to do better on tracking and looking at the plans to meet the 1.5. So I actually am really excited to see what UK PLC are going to do on that transition planning, and I think they can't do it without their FM companies. They're going to be looking to you for help, guidance and support and transparency. So I think that would be the one thing I'd highlight.
Yeah, fantastic, and great call to arms there as well. Chris, for yourself? And for the SFMI?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we've kind of touched on it, and kind of following on from what Sonia said, you know, that call to arms will bring a plethora of, and I think we've seen a bunch of announcements within kind of FM companies across LinkedIn and things, announcing their plans and such. And so actually, I think from our perspective, it will be getting into the meat and bones of what's good and what's not good. So which companies are brushing over the surface to try and make a little bit of extra ends meet, and which companies are actually, you know, they know their stuff, and they're able to do it, and they're able to fully embed with their clients and actually make a difference.
Yeah, fantastic. And Sharon, the last word with you.
I would just say it's I think the trend is a welcome one, and it's likely to be the increased challenge from our clients and our customers, and we welcome that. And with that comes more specific elements, but we're ready to sort of meet those challenges and requirements. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much, Sharon. Thank you very much to the panelists for the discussion. Unfortunately, we've had a slight shorter time to run through. There's some other questions which I did want to ask as well around collaboration, but we can pick up on that next time. Thank you very much. Chris, over to you.
Cool, thank you very much. And yes, sorry everyone for going over time. So just, I think, coming up, what's next really, what's coming up? So things to look out for if you're part of the SFMI. We are, I think, literally going to take a couple of hours break after this, and then we're getting into the scorecard reports for those companies that took part in it, to make sure that they are all finished and done and dusted for presenting to the companies that took part, so you can get your feedback and kind of understand the pros and cons which came out of our assessments. We got into, so we released last Thursday our kind of part one of our scope 3 in FM services reports, which I would recommend you pop onto the SFMI webpage. There's a specific page focused on it, and we will be working with the review panel, the industry bodies, and the FMs, as well as the sponsor BAM, for developing the second part to that, which we aim to release in early February, which will be giving kind of much more granular detail into how to measure scope 3 emissions within FM and the services that you provide. So it allows you to engage with those customers and start those conversations to say, okay, here are the allocated emissions to you as a customer. Then also in January, we kick off, when everyone's back, I think in the second week of January, we release our procurement in our sustainable FM procurement report, which we've been working on over the last 2 or 3 months, and we've had a number of interviews with our signatories, with the purchasers of FM. And again, it's that kind of guidance note for both purchasers of FM services as well as for the FM providers themselves, and giving both sides of the equation to help organisations find that kind of middle ground when they're going through tenders and kind of and working with each other in order to kind of actually embed sustainability into the FM service, rather than it being spoken about on a tender level and then being kind of added into the innovation box, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, when it comes down to the service level agreements, it seems to vanish, which is what we've kind of seen time and time again. Also, we continue to run our bite-sized webinar series we're kind of running up to the end of the SFMI year. We mentioned about the kind of the low scoring water score, low scoring criteria of water. So we're actually we've kind of brought on board a kind of a specialist in water, Meth Ben, who's going to be leading our 19th our bite-sized webinar on the 19th, while also kind of we'll be looking at a leaders forum on water as well. I think coming into the March-April period. But then also Skanska, obviously, quite nicely fit in accidentally, to be honest, coming in as the as one of the joint leaders. Will be conducting their webinar on the 16th of February. I think we're kind of ironing out what they'll be talking about as well, and then followed up by Arcus in March. But then also we kick off our leaders forum as well in early 2022, and we're going to be looking at technology in FM, which will be quite exciting. So we're kind of drawing together the plans for that. But also we'll be following up on the last forum, which is discussing kind of the roadmap for before sustainability in the industry, and then also those kind of KPIs which can come out of that. But there's kind of a consultation process that we'll be going through with organisations. So next slide, our final slide, I think. So yeah, I think, you know, with the SFMI, we're going to be looking at potential kind of amendments and changes as we approach the new SFMI year, kind of moving from April onwards. The key needs that have come out of this last year is that kind of need for upskilling, need for guidance for the industry. There's been, you know, I think that these are coming from the successes of the year. So, you know, we've seen we're excited by the Scope 3 report that we're putting out. You know, a lot of research that's been going into that, and we see it as really good for the industry in order to create that consistent approach to measuring Scope 3, which we believe will help the industry to become more transparent and increase its disclosure, which will actually provide more a better reputational value for the industry. So actually that as a model is very exciting for us, because if we can provide this kind of industry-wide guidance on a number of different topics, then we're really appealing to the mission of the SFMI, which is embedding sustainability into that management and operation of FM. So we see there's a need for kind of research and collaboration. So we're going to be consulting with members about, you know, what are other topics that we can be driving as a community and as an approach. We've started a recent kind of exciting bit of work, I think, to help IWFM in that need for upskilling as well. So we're kind of consulting on the training needs of FM providers. So we're kind of going down to that kind of basic skill requirements for FM level, which again is very exciting work for us, and we're using the influence of the SFMI assessment process and the roadmap. And finally, there's you know, we've had an increase in the number of smaller FM providers who are really keen and interested to get involved. So we've had a few organisations come on board recently from the smaller FM category, and if I'm honest, there were a couple of other organisations which were really keen to get involved, but just didn't quite sign on the line for this year, but are keen to get involved next year. So we are going to be, you know, having a bit of a think about how to become, I think, more inclusive for those smaller companies, and and what their needs are when in comparison to the larger, more established providers out there. So these are kind of a few themes, I think, which we are currently strategizing over, and we're going to be going out for consultation to the partners. So be prepared, I think, for a little conversation about how the SFMI is structured in the 2022 year. So thank you very much to all of our speakers, Alan, Sonia, Sunil, Sophie, and also Sharon. Congratulations to Skanska and Da Vinci Facilities for for being winners. And also congratulations to the platinum provider, to the platinum industry winners, and to everyone who's taken part as well, and just going through that learning process, and the value that it brings companies when building up their when trying to embed sustainability across their business, because it's by no means an easy feat to do so. So taking part each year is is a testimony to companies who are trying to go through that journey and taking it on one step at a time. So thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to speaking to you all in the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.